If you call coronavirus a Chinese virus, journalists will lose their minds faster than they're losing their jobs. But if you blame Christians for the coronavirus, well, that's just high-quality reporting. On Friday, the New York Times posted, "The road to coronavirus hell was paved by evangelicals. Trump's response to the pandemic has been haunted by the science denialism of his ultra-conservative religious allies." This article was written by Ace Hackett, Catherine Stewart, author of The Power Worshippers, Inside the Dangerous Rise of Religious Nationalism. She's also the author of The Good News Club, The Christian Right's Stealth Assault on America's Children. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, Christians are coming to get you once again. Not only are we about to take over the country and establish a theocracy and assault your kids, we're even going to get you killed by influencing President Donald Trump to ignore the coronavirus. It's just what we do. We're anti-science and anti-medicine, but pro-theocracy, pro-coronavirus, and pro-assaulting your children. After a brief blowback, the New York Times retitled the piece, "The Religious Right's Hostility to Science is Crippling Our Coronavirus Response." Why is the disease spreading so rapidly in the U.S.? Anti-science Christians. Why isn't there more testing? Anti-science Christians. The New York Times gets it. Of course, there's already been a poll on people's response to coronavirus with the results categorized by worldview. I'll put a link to this in the description box. People were asked if they're currently practicing social distancing. 86% of Christians said they're practicing social distancing. 88% of non-Christians said they're practicing social distancing. 80% of atheists are practicing social distancing. 78% of agnostics are practicing social distancing. If we divide up Christians, we find that 89% of non-Protestants/Catholics, 82% of evangelicals, and 85% of non-evangelicals are practicing social distancing. Are you noticing a pattern? Neither am I. The percentages associated with various groups are actually pretty close to one another, especially when you factor in the margin of error. Since nearly all ideological groups are in the 80 to 90% range, I suspect that this probably comes down to personality type. There are probably 10 to 20% of every group who just aren't worried enough to practice social distancing. But what if we're like the New York Times and we want to start pointing fingers anyway? Well, interestingly, atheists and agnostics are on the lower end of the poll. Are they the real science deniers who are paving the way to coronavirus hell? Imagine the New York Times posting an article claiming that atheists and agnostics are paving the way to coronavirus hell. Imagine you start reading the article and you find the journalist claiming that atheists think that life is meaningless, so they don't even care if they get coronavirus. Imagine that the journalist then gives 3 or 4 examples of atheists claiming that life is meaningless, and that she then insists that this trend in atheism is crippling our response to coronavirus. Wouldn't you think that this journalist is a complete moron? Wouldn't you wonder why the New York Times is posting this kind of nonsense? And yet, that's basically what the New York Times is doing. They're just doing it while targeting Christians, which, again, is top-notch journalism. There's a pretty good response article by Timothy Carney in the Washington Examiner. He also summarizes Catherine Stewart's arguments, so I don't need to do it myself. You simply knew this opinion piece was going to come out sooner or later. The argument appeared in any Twitter thread that touched on religion and the coronavirus. Mike Pence put in charge of the coronavirus task force? He's anti-science. Will he try to pray it away? A Christian kindergarten teacher dies of the virus? I guess the prayers didn't work. It showed up in second-rate left-of-center media such as Salon.com. Is the Christian right now in charge of public health, they ask, because Redfield and Birx are both evangelical Christians? Through this lens, a certain portion of the left gets to see our current crisis in the most self-congratulatory way. Blaming anti-science evangelicals for this all satisfies the vanity and ideological appetites of a certain type of liberal. That's right, dumb evangelicals don't believe in hospitals. They just sit around and pray. When the son of evangelicals falls out of the stupid tree and hits every branch on the way down and breaks his arm, his evangelical parents don't take him to the doctor. They just pray for his arm to get better. I've personally never met one of these anti-medicine, anti-hospital, anti-doctor, anti-treatment evangelicals, but I know they're out there because Twitter. Simply hating evangelicals isn't good enough. No, it's far better to look down on them as self-deluded, anti-science rubes, because certain liberals really love science, who offer up prayers instead of scientifically proven scientific solutions. And now this trope has bubbled to the very top, to the opinion pages of the New York Times. The road to coronavirus hell was paved by evangelicals, a New York Times article tells us in the headline. The piece is by Catherine Stewart, an author whose recent book fits in a broad category of paranoid literature that is basically the left's version of Sharia law is coming conspiracy theory. Hers is about the 1,000th book in the past 20 years to warn that America is about to become a theocracy. Trump's response to the pandemic has been haunted by the science denialism of his ultra-conservative religious allies, the subheadline reads. Wait for it. But David, aren't you one of those Sharia law is coming conspiracy theorists? Nope. I don't believe that the United States will ever be under Sharia. I do point out when certain elements of Sharia are implemented in the West by well-meaning idiots who don't realize what they're doing. For instance, there are places in Europe where calling Muhammad a pedophile is now a crime, even though Muhammad had sex with a 9-year-old girl. The boneheads who made that law don't seem to realize that they're now enforcing an element of Sharia. Those are the kinds of things I'm concerned about. As for Islam taking over and imposing Sharia on all of us, never going to happen. So, nice try. Science denialism, ultra-conservative religious. Perfect catchphrases. But the giveaway is the weasel phrase there, haunted by. She's trying to imply causality that she knows she cannot assert. She's trying to imply that evangelical conservatives caused this plague, even though it began in Wuhan, China, where less than 3% of the country is Christian. Globally, the greatest concentrations of the virus are in northern Italy and in Spain, which are not hubs of conservative evangelicalism. In the United States, the hubs are New York City and New Orleans, also not packed to the gills with white conservative evangelicals. So, how does this author pin this plague on the specific set of believers she wants to demonize? By asserting the broad prejudices of her intended audience. Donald Trump rose to power with the determined assistance of a movement that denies science, bashes government, and prioritizes loyalty over professional expertise. In the current crisis, we are all reaping what that movement has sown. The current crisis is the spread of coronavirus. Why is it spreading so rapidly? Why are we so ill-prepared? Because of evangelical Christians who support Donald Trump. This is the New York Times. She then absurdly pins slavery on American Christianity. Then she accuses Christians of denying critical thinking. She then cites 2 evangelical leaders who spoke about having services despite the outbreak. At least one immediately decided to cancel services. She also points out that Secretary of Health and Human Services Alex Azar is a pro-life Christian. She points to no actions by Azar that caused the coronavirus, much less a nexus with Christianity. She levels basically the same attack against Ben Carson, Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. A great tell is this sentence. By all accounts, President Trump's tendency to trust his gut over the experts on issues like vaccines and climate change does not come from any deep-seated religious conviction. Yes, right there we have an explanation for the shortcomings of Trump's handling of this outbreak. It's simple. It comports with everything we know about Trump. He is not deeply religious. He does not deeply consider hard evidence. He does trust his gut. Yet that obvious and simple story isn't so satisfying because it doesn't denigrate religious people. Miss Stewart somehow says that this example of Trump being Trump is actually a product of anti-science Bible thumpers. Let me know what you think of Miss Stewart's theory in the comments section. I'll link to her article in the description box. Before I close, I wanted to draw your attention to a new Gallup poll. Gallup asked people whether they approve or disapprove of the way various institutions are responding to coronavirus. Check out the results. Hospitals, 88% approval rating. Schools, 83% approval rating. State governments, 82% approval rating. Employers, 82% approval rating. Government health agencies, 80% approval rating. Vice President Mike Pence, 61% approval rating. President Donald Trump, 60% approval rating. Congress, 59% approval rating. The news media, 44% approval rating. It seems that most people are satisfied with the way most U.S. institutions are responding to coronavirus. The people who are least satisfied with our country's response to coronavirus are journalists who blame anyone they don't like for anything the rest of us don't like. And yet, the news media is the institution that has by far the lowest approval rating of everyone else. With such powerful and insightful articles being posted by the New York Times, proving conclusively that evangelical Christians are sabotaging our president's response to coronavirus, why do people think that journalists are doing a terrible job responding to coronavirus? One of life's great mysteries.